Today's Take 5 with the Saints. April the 1st is someone who is far from being an April Fool. That is Frederick Denison Maurice, or F.D. Maurice, a 19th century priest who was a reluctant Anglican, at least early in his life, but who became someone who was fervently loyal and passionate for the doctrine, discipline, and especially the worship of the Church of England. He was a man who was a very active participant in the Christian socialist movement, that latter word being something that connotes a variety of meanings, most of which are not very well thought of in today's world, and yet most of those connotations or stereotypes that we hold today had nothing to do with F.D. Maurice and his view of the world. And he was a man whom his peers and even his enemies regarded as someone who could put one foot in contradictory positions side by side, as well as putting a foot in the temporal and in the eternal purposes of God, and help humanity to be able to find a way to reconcile itself to each other and to God. Indeed, an intellectual and a spiritual giant that we celebrate today. The scripture that goes with his feast day today comes out of John chapter 18, verses 33 through 37. Then Pilate entered the headquarters again, summoned Jesus and asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "Do you ask this on your own, or did others tell you about me?" Pilate replied, "I am not a Jew, am I? Your own nation and the chief priests have handed you over to me. What have you done?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not from this world. If my kingdom were from this world, my followers would be fighting to keep me from being handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not from here." Pilate asked him, "So you are a king?" Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king. For this I was born, and for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice." F.D. Maurice, among many things you can say about him, is one who tried to make it well known to everyone that he ministered to and everyone that he interacted with on a political and professional level, that God was indeed king of both the life that we see here around us and of the life that came beyond. He was born in 1805, actually, into a Unitarian family. He studied law at Cambridge, but initially refused to accept the degree because in the early 19th century, in order to accept a degree from a state institution in England, you had to subscribe to the 39 Articles of Faith, something that is in some ways very sadly forgotten as part of our heritage as Episcopalians and Anglicans, but the 39 Articles are the essential and foundational doctrine of the Church of England, and still something that Church of England clergy, at least nominally, have to swear to when they are ordained. But back then you had to swear to if you graduated from a school. He refused, and as such refused to accept the degree that he had studied so long for as an active dissenter to the Church of England. However, it was a few years later, when going through a series of crises in his own personal life, that he ultimately did convert to the Anglican Church and became ordained in 1834 and began to teach. And he got a degree and then began to teach at King's College in London as a professor of English literature and history, then ultimately becoming the chair of theology. It was very early on in his life, and very, very soon after he became an Anglican too, that he became involved with what was becoming very popular at that time, the Christian socialist movement. Karl Marx was rising to the scene at that point, and there were some things that people like F.D. Maurice took from Karl Marx, in particular a concern for the welfare of the ordinary people. Throughout his entire ministry career, whether he was teaching, serving as a parish priest, or serving as someone who was writing on behalf of the church, he was someone who advocated for the church to be aware of the needs of the people, particularly the increasing poor class that was coming to be in London, in large part because of the stratification of economic castes, for lack of a better word, that the Industrial Revolution was solidifying in London and across the English countryside. But where he differed, along with many other Christian socialists, from Karl Marx about religion declared it to be the opiate of the people. To which F.D. Maurice responded to that, writing, "We have been dosing our people with religion when what they want is not this, but the living God." It was a man who, despite that statement, actually did find within his religious practice a way to encounter the living God, but very often criticized, much to his own detriment, sometimes the stale or apathetic approach to worship and liturgy that many of his Anglican clergy colleagues did take. Maurice continued to proclaim this message even after the Christian socialist movement fell by the wayside. He continued to raise up the problems of English society while still remaining a professor and teaching moral theology at the end of his life at Cambridge. One of the things that he spoke of, however, as he spoke of the need to watch and take care of the temporal or material needs of the people in the church and in society, he also wrote that worship itself was instrumental to the life of someone who was active in the social gospel, because it was in worship that time and eternity, the temporal and the eternal, met. And he wrote about it. He says, "I do not think we are to praise the liturgy, but to use it. When we do not want it for our life, we may begin to talk of it as a beautiful composition." He was a man who was shunned being given a title such as high church or broad church or low church, but his respect and devotion to the liturgy itself was one in which he said when we participate in it, we should realize what is actually happening here and not simply put in our hour on Sunday morning. F.D. Maurice, for me personally, has been a great motivator for me because for many years I was a person who espoused that I was a spiritual but not religious person. In F.D. Maurice, I have found that my spirituality and my religion enhance each other when both seek to encounter the presence of God that is working in my soul and the presence of God that is working around me in the communities in which I serve and in the communities of people in the areas beyond my own that are crying out for need and just thirsty for hope and love in a world which, like the 19th century English urban and countryside areas here today, 21st century America here in East Tennessee especially, there are many people who are crying out for help. Our gospel, our faith, our worship are meant to orient us to hearing that call and to seeing God's presence in the midst of all the people around whom we serve and work. F.D. Maurice indeed is a person that I commend to you for further reading. I say that all the time in these videos, but if you really want to read and study a man who did not approach his faith from the quote-unquote traditional perspective. In other words, he asked a lot of very probing questions. He did not come from a background in which he just assumed that church was always a part of society, but questioned it, but came to embrace it and welcome it as how it helped God to shape his life and his life of service in the world. Please read more of F.D. Maurice. I cannot recommend him enough for your own personal study. So, with that being said, that's all I will say today. Read up on F.D. Maurice and then join me tomorrow as our saint of the day is James Lloyd Breck. Look forward to seeing you then. Take care.